The November wind cut across the high desert range with the kind of cold that found every gap in tactical gear. Brenna Castellano pulled her jacket tighter as she stepped off the transport truck, boots hitting the hardpack with a soft crunch. The advanced weapons testing facility sprawled before her, a collection of flat-roof buildings and observation towers arranged around the main firing range. Beyond the structures, target arrays stretched into the distance, metal frames glinting in the pale morning sun. She had arrived early, as always. The evaluation teams would not arrive for another 40 minutes, which gave her time to complete her assigned duties without interference. Brenna headed toward the equipment depot, her credentials already in hand. The guard at the gate barely glanced at her identification before waving her through. Inside the depot, rows of weapon cases lined the walls like sleeping sentinels. She located the manifest and began her inspection, running through the checklist with practiced efficiency. Each rifle system needed verification before the day's trials could begin. The new Mark 7 Precision rifle represented 3 years of development and $18 million in contracts. Today would determine whether that investment had been worth it. Brenna handled each component with care, her fingers moving with the unconscious grace of long familiarity. She checked optical systems, verified ammunition lots, confirmed each serial number against the paperwork. The work was methodical and calming, exactly the kind of task she preferred. No attention, no questions, just the quiet satisfaction of preparation done correctly. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar acts of precision and skill where you're from. The first evaluators arrived in a convoy of 3 vehicles, their engines announcing them long before they appeared. Brenna watched through the depot window as the doors opened and men climbed out, their movements loose with confidence. She recognized the type immediately. Elite snipers carried themselves with a particular swagger, the body language of operators who had earned their reputation through fire and distance. Lieutenant Wade Harrigan emerged from the lead vehicle, his voice carrying across the compound before he had taken 3 steps. Big and broad-shouldered, he moved like someone who had never encountered an obstacle he could not overcome through sheer force of presence. 2 other men flanked him, both wearing the same casual arrogance like a second uniform. Harrigan's laugh boomed as he approached the range control building. "One of you better have coffee ready," he called out to no one in particular. "This new toy better be worth dragging us out to the middle of nowhere." Brenna stayed in the depot, continuing her work. She had 3 more cases to verify before the official start time. Through the window, she watched more personnel arrive. Range control staff, weapons engineers, a handful of observers from procurement. The crowd grew, voices rising in greeting and speculation. At precisely 0800, Colonel Thaddeus Kern appeared on the range control observation deck. His presence brought immediate quiet. Kern was a tall man, rail-thin, with silver hair cropped military short and eyes that missed nothing. He surveyed the assembled personnel with the expression of someone conducting an inspection. "Gentlemen," Kern began, his voice carrying easily across the range, "you have been selected to evaluate the Mark 7 Precision rifle system. This weapon represents the cutting edge of long-range engagement technology. Your feedback today will determine whether we proceed to full production or return to development." Harrigan shifted his weight, arms crossed over his chest. "With respect, Colonel, the previous 2 iterations could not hit center mass at 800 meters. What makes this one different?" Kern's expression did not change. "That is what you are here to determine, Lieutenant. The engineers assure me the problems have been corrected. Your job is to prove or disprove that assertion." The briefing continued for another 10 minutes. Kern outlined the day's schedule, the scoring system, the specific performance metrics each evaluator would need to meet. Brenna listened from the depot doorway, her final equipment check complete. When Kern finished, she gathered the documentation and headed toward the range control building to submit her report. She took the back entrance, avoiding the main gathering. The hallway was empty, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. She found the duty officer's station and placed the paperwork on the desk, everything properly signed and verified. "You Castellano?" the duty officer asked without looking up. "Yes, sir." "Equipment ready?" "All systems verified and ready for issue." "Good. Head down to the range. They will need someone to manage the ammunition supply during the trials." Brenna nodded and turned to go. Behind her, she heard the duty officer already calling the next name on his list, moving through the day's logistics with mechanical efficiency. She made her way back outside, where the evaluators had begun moving toward the firing line. The range itself was impressive. 20 individual lanes, each equipped with target systems that could be configured for varying distances and conditions. Today's evaluation would push shooters from 600 to 1,200 meters, testing accuracy, consistency, and the ability to adapt to changing wind conditions. Harrigan reached the first station, his team already unpacking cases. He lifted the Mark 7 from its foam cradle, his hands large around the stock. "Nice lines," he admitted, turning the weapon to catch the light. But Pretty does not put rounds on target. One of his teammates, a shorter man with sergeant stripes and a North Boston accent, laughed. "Remember the Mark 5? Things shot like we were firing around corners." "Do not remind me," Harrigan replied. "I still have the after-action report from that disaster." If this one performs the same way, someone in engineering is getting a very direct conversation. Brenna took her position at the ammunition supply station, a reinforced table set back from the firing line. Wooden crates containing precisely measured loads were stacked beside her, each box labeled with lot numbers and ballistic specifications. Her job was simple: distribute ammunition as requested, maintain the log, ensure no mix-ups occurred that might compromise the evaluation data. From this vantage point, she had a clear view of the entire range. The evaluators were spreading out, each claiming a lane. Harrigan had taken lane 5, the center position, where his performance would be most visible to the observation deck. He was checking the rifle's action now, working the bolt with sharp, practiced movements. The range officer called for weapons hot. The command rippled down the line, followed by the metallic clicks of magazines being seated and charging handles being pulled. Brenna watched Harrigan settle into position behind his rifle, his body forming the familiar triangle of stability. The spotter beside him called wind values, his voice steady and professional. Harrigan fired. The report cracked across the desert, sharp and clean. Brenna saw him work the bolt, chamber another round, settle again. 3 more shots followed in quick succession. Through the range's video feed displayed on monitors near her station, she could see the target downrange at 600 meters. 4 holes clustered near the target's edge, none touching the center ring. Harrigan's voice carried clearly. Wind call was off. "Give me the correction." His spotter checked the instruments, recalculated. 2.5 right, half up. Another string of fire. This time the impact scattered worse, one completely missing the target frame. Harrigan sat up, frustration evident in his posture. He examined the rifle, checking the scope mounting, the stock bedding, anything that might explain the poor performance. Down the line, other shooters were experiencing similar results. The crack of rifles continued, but the target monitors showed the same story repeated across 20 lanes. Scattered groups, inconsistent impacts, rounds wandering despite correct wind calls and proper fundamentals. Colonel Kern descended from the observation deck, his expression unreadable. He walked the firing line slowly, stopping at each position to examine targets. When he reached Harrigan's lane, he stood in silence for a long moment. "Lieutenant, your fundamentals?" "Solid, sir. I have verified 0 on 3 different platforms this month. The weapon is not performing." Kern looked at the rifle, then at the target display. "Continue the evaluation. We need complete data before making determinations." Harrigan nodded, but Brenna could see the tension in his shoulders. He was a man accustomed to success, and failure sat poorly on him. When Kern moved on, Harrigan turned to his spotter. "Something is wrong with these rifles. Trigger feels mushy, and I am getting inconsistent resistance on the bolt." The Boston sergeant from earlier approached the ammunition station. Brenna looked up from her logbook as he arrived. Need to swap to Lot 773, he said. Maybe different powder load will help. Brenna retrieved the requested ammunition, checking the lot number twice before handing it over. The sergeant took it without acknowledgement, already turning away. She logged the transaction and returned to watching the range. The morning progressed with mounting frustration. Shooters moved through different ammunition lots, adjusted scopes, checked and rechecked their equipment. Nothing improved the performance. At the 800-meter line, the problems multiplied. Rifles that had struggled at 600 became nearly unusable at longer range. During a ceasefire for target servicing, Harrigan stalked back to the equipment area. His face was red, whether from sun or anger Brenna could not tell. He practically threw the rifle onto the cleaning table, then stood with hands on his hips, staring at it like it had personally betrayed him. One of the weapons engineers approached cautiously. "Lieutenant, we are seeing consistent patterns across all evaluation platforms. The data suggests I do not need data to tell me these weapons cannot shoot," Harrigan interrupted. "I need you to explain how $18 million produced rifles that could not hit a barn from inside it." The engineer flinched. "We ran extensive testing. The prototypes performed within specifications. Then something changed between prototype and production." Harrigan picked up the rifle again, his movements sharp with frustration. He pointed to the barrel. "This harmonics? The bedding? What am I missing?" Brenna had moved closer, drawn by professional curiosity despite herself. From her angle, she could see what Harrigan was indicating. The barrel bedding showed slight gaps, inconsistent contact with the stock. Not obvious, but enough to affect precision. She also noticed the scope rings were not quite aligned, creating subtle cant that would compound at distance. The engineer was examining the rifle now, his expression troubled. "I will need to section this weapon and compare it to specifications. If there is a manufacturing variance, if—" Harrigan set the rifle down with controlled force. "There is clearly something wrong. The question is whether it is fixable or whether we just wasted 3 years." Other evaluators had gathered, forming a loose circle around the discussion. Each had similar complaints: inconsistent groups, wandering zeros, unpredictable performance. The Boston sergeant voiced what several were thinking. "We should recommend suspension of the evaluation until engineering identifies the problem. No point continuing when the platform is fundamentally flawed." Kern rejoined the group, having completed his circuit of the range. His expression remained neutral, but Brenna detected tension in the set of his jaw. "Gentlemen, I understand your frustrations. However, we will complete the scheduled evaluation. The data you generate, even negative data, is valuable for engineering analysis." "With respect," Colonel Harrigan said, his voice carefully controlled, "continuing this evaluation wastes time and ammunition. These weapons are not combat-ready. Your recommendation is noted, Lieutenant. However, my decision stands." We continue. The evaluators exchanged glances, but said nothing further. Kern's tone allowed no argument. They began drifting back toward the firing line, movements slow and reluctant. The enthusiasm from the morning had evaporated, replaced by the grim determination of men completing an unpleasant duty. Brenna returned to her station. She watched Harrigan take his position again, saw him force his body into proper form despite obvious frustration. The rifle cracked, the bolt worked, the brass ejected in glittering arcs. Downrange, the targets remained largely untouched by accurate fire. The afternoon would be worse, she knew. Longer distances, more complex shooting problems, all attempted with weapons that could not perform the basic tasks they were designed for. She checked her ammunition inventory, made notes in her log, and waited for the next request. Around her, the sound of failure echoed across the high desert range. The lunch break brought no relief from the tension hanging over the range. Evaluators clustered in small groups, their conversations punctuated by sharp gestures and head shakes. Brenna ate her meal apart from the others, sitting on an equipment crate in the shade of the depot building. From here, she could observe without being observed, a position she had cultivated throughout her career. Harrigan's voice rose above the general murmur. He stood near the mess tent, holding court before a half-dozen other shooters. In 15 years, I have never seen weapons perform this poorly. Not in testing, not in combat. Nowhere. Someone signed off on these rifles without proper verification. A captain with airborne tabs nodded agreement. The Mark 6 had issues, but at least it would group at 600. These scatter like we're firing smooth gun. The Boston sergeant contributed his analysis. Trigger pull varies by almost 2 pounds between weapons. That alone explains half our problems. Add the bedding issues and scope can't, and we have a perfect storm of incompetence. Brenna listened while chewing her sandwich slowly. Their analysis was correct as far as it went, but incomplete. She had noticed additional problems they had missed. Gas system timing inconsistencies, extractor tension variations, even subtle differences in chamber dimensions between rifles. The Mark 7's failures were not singular but systemic, suggesting problems in the manufacturing process itself. An engineer approached Harrigan's group, tablet in hand. Lieutenant, preliminary data shows the barrel harmonics are outside specifications. The manufacturing tolerance on the barrel contour appears to have drifted during production. Appears to have drifted? Harrigan's voice dripped skepticism. Either it did or it did not. Which is it? The engineer's face flushed. Without sectioning multiple barrels, I cannot provide definitive. Then section them. Harrigan cut him off. We need answers, not qualifications. The colonel wants this evaluation completed, which means we need to know if these problems are fixable. The engineer retreated, already making notes on his tablet. Brenna watched the interaction with careful neutrality. Harrigan was not wrong to demand clarity, but his approach created defensiveness rather than cooperation. She had seen this pattern before. Skilled operators who excelled in their specialty but struggled with the diplomatic nuances of testing and development. Colonel Kern emerged from the range control building as the lunch period ended. His presence drew immediate attention. Gentlemen, we resume in 10 minutes. The afternoon session will focus on the 900 and 1,000-meter lines. I expect complete data collection regardless of individual weapon performance. Harrigan straightened. Colonel, with the problems we have identified, would it not be more productive to... The evaluation continues as scheduled, Lieutenant. Kern's tone allowed no discussion. Your concerns are noted and will be included in the final report. However, we need comprehensive data to support any recommendations. The evaluators dispersed toward their lanes, movements reluctant. Brenna gathered fresh ammunition loads and returned to her station. The afternoon sun beat down with relentless intensity, heat waves shimmering off the hardpack beyond the firing line. At 900 meters, the failures became spectacular. Harrigan's first shot missed the target entirely, the round impacting somewhere in the empty desert beyond. His second attempt struck the frame, but nowhere near the scoring rings. He fired an entire magazine, achieving only 3 hits on target, none approaching center mass. The Boston sergeant fared no better. His rifle jammed on the 4th round, the bolt refusing to close fully. He cleared the malfunction, tried again, and experienced the same failure. After 3 attempts, he called a ceasefire and requested the range officer inspect his weapon. Down the line, similar scenes played out. Rifles that had struggled at shorter distances became completely unreliable at extended range. The combination of distance, wind, and mechanical inconsistencies created an impossible shooting problem. The crack of rifles continued, but the strikes on target became increasingly rare. Brenna recorded each ammunition request in her log, noting the increasing frequency as shooters burned through rounds trying to achieve acceptable performance. The numbers told a clear story. These weapons were consuming 3 to 4 times the expected ammunition to achieve half the required hits. During a reload pause, a young specialist approached her station. He looked barely old enough to shave, but wore the scroll of a qualified sniper on his sleeve. Ma'am, do you have lot 8 tone available? My spotter thinks maybe the heavier grain might stabilize better at this distance. Brenna checked her inventory. I have it. She retrieved the box and handed it over, making the log entry. The specialist nodded his thanks and hurried back to his lane. She watched him load the new ammunition, settle behind his rifle, and fire. The result was identical to his previous attempts. A miss, followed by another miss, followed by frustrated adjustment of his scope. He sat up, removed his eye protection, and rubbed his face with both hands. Harrigan appeared at the ammunition station without warning. His presence filled the space, all broad shoulders and barely contained frustration. "I need lot 773 again," he said, "and a fresh barrel if you have one cataloged." Brenna met his eyes briefly, then checked her manifest. No spare barrels allocated for field replacement. Only lot 773 ammunition. He took the ammunition box with more force than necessary. "Of course no spares. Why would we bring spare barrels to a barrel evaluation?" His sarcasm was bitter. He started to turn away, then paused. "You have been watching all day. You see what we are dealing with?" "Yes, sir. The weapons are not performing to specification. That is putting it mildly." He gestured toward the range with the ammunition box. "Half these shooters could make expert marksmen with iron sights and surplus ammunition. Put them behind these expensive failures, and they cannot hit anything. It is not the shooters. It is the platform." Brenna said nothing. Harrigan seemed to expect a response, but when none came, he shook his head and walked back to his lane. She watched him go, noting the set of his shoulders, the aggressive pace of his stride. He was a man accustomed to competence being rewarded, and this situation violated his understanding of how evaluations should function. The afternoon wore on. The 1,000-meter line proved even worse than 900. Harrigan fired 30 rounds and achieved 2 hits on the target frame, 0 in the scoring area. Other evaluators reported similar results. The video feeds showed targets largely unmarked, pristine white surfaces mocking the efforts of elite shooters. Colonel Kern walked the line again, his face unreadable. He stopped at each position, examined the rifles, reviewed the scorecards. At Harrigan Station, he stood in silence for almost a minute before speaking. "Your assessment, Lieutenant?" Harrigan did not hesitate. "These weapons are not suitable for issue, sir. They fail basic accuracy requirements and demonstrate inconsistent mechanical function. I recommend immediate suspension of the program, pending complete engineering review." Kern nodded slowly. "Your recommendation will be included in my report. Continue the evaluation." The sun was setting when the range finally went cold for the day. Evening descended over the range with the temperature dropping fast. Brenna secured the ammunition inventory, logging final counts and reconciling expenditures against the day's usage. The numbers were damning. Nearly 4,000 rounds fired for results that should have required fewer than 800. Every metric pointed toward systemic failure. The evaluators had gathered in the briefing room for the day's debrief. Through the window, Brenna could see them arranged in rows of folding chairs, faces illuminated by the projection screen at the front. Colonel Kern stood beside the screen, advancing through slides of performance data. Even from outside, the numbers looked brutal. She finished her inventory checklist and headed toward the equipment depot to secure the remaining ammunition. The walk took her past the briefing room's exterior door, left propped open to allow air circulation. Voices drifted out into the darkening evening. Kern was speaking, his tone professionally neutral despite the content. "As you can see, across all 20 evaluation platforms, we achieved a 17% hit rate at 600 meters, 9% at 800, and 4% at distances beyond. These numbers fall well below minimum acceptable standards." Harrigan's voice cut through. "Colonel, those numbers represent complete program failure. We cannot recommend adoption of a weapon system that performs worse than equipment developed 30 years ago. I am aware of the implications, Lieutenant. However, we need to complete the full evaluation protocol before making final recommendations. Tomorrow we will attempt the precision courses and low-light engagements." A chorus of protests rose. The Boston sergeant's accent carried clearly over the others. "Sir, with respect, we are wasting time and resources. These rifles cannot pass basic function tests. Moving to advanced protocols makes no sense. The data must be complete. Kern's voice remained calm. Engineering needs comprehensive failure documentation to identify root causes. Your continued participation, despite the frustration, serves that purpose. Brenna moved away from the door, continuing toward the depot. Behind her, the debate continued, voices rising and falling in waves of argument and response. She understood both perspectives. The evaluators wanted to cut losses and move on. Kern needed documentation that would satisfy oversight committees and contract review boards. Inside the depot, she began the process of securing the ammunition. Each lot went into its designated storage locker, the doors sealed and locked. The work was mechanical, allowing her mind to drift through the day's observations. She had identified at least 7 distinct mechanical problems with the Mark 7 platform, possibly more. Some were manufacturing variances. Others suggested fundamental design flaws that pre-production testing should have caught. The depot door opened. Brenna turned to find the young specialist from earlier standing in the entrance. He looked uncertain, as if debating whether to proceed. "Ma'am, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to return the lot Ateteton. We did not use all of it." She accepted the partial box, checking the count before logging it. The specialist lingered, shifting his weight. "You work a lot of evaluations?" he asked. "Some," Brenna replied, keeping her tone neutral. "This is my first major one." The specialist glanced back toward the briefing room. "I expected it to go better. The other guys, they have been doing this for years. Seeing them struggle like this, it makes you wonder. Wonder what? If maybe we are the problem instead of the rifles. Like maybe we're missing something obvious." Brenna considered her response carefully. "The weapons have documented mechanical issues. That is not shooter error." "Yeah, but..." The specialist trailed off, then tried again. "Lieutenant Harrigan, he has more confirmed kills than I have training rounds. If he cannot make these rifles work, what chance do the rest of us have?" "Experience matters," Brenna said, "but so does equipment reliability. One cannot compensate for the other indefinitely." The specialist nodded, though he did not look convinced. He thanked her and left, shoulders slumped. Brenna watched him go, recognizing the particular deflation of confidence that came from failing at something you expected to master. She finished securing the ammunition and locked the depot. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The range lights created pools of illumination against the desert night, islands of visibility in an ocean of black. Most personnel had dispersed to temporary quarters, but a few figures remained near the range control building. Brenna walked toward her assigned quarters, a small room in the visiting personnel barracks. The path took her past the rifle maintenance area, where several weapons engineers were still working. Bright lights flooded the space, and she could see rifles disassembled on workbenches, components laid out in precise arrangements. One engineer was measuring barrel dimensions with calipers, recording numbers on a data sheet. Another examined a bolt assembly under magnification, his face inches from the eyepiece. They worked in focused silence, hunting for answers in tolerances and specifications. A voice called from behind. "Castellano, wait up." Brenna turned to find Captain Merrick approaching. He was one of the evaluators, a quiet man who had spoken little during the day's shooting. His performance had been middle of the pack, poor, but not catastrophically so. "I wanted to ask your opinion on something," Merrick said when he reached her. "You have been watching all day from the ammunition point. Did you notice any pattern to which shooters had the worst performance?" Brenna measured her words. "The failures appear consistent across all shooters and all weapons. I did not observe any pattern suggesting operator variance as the primary factor." "That is what I thought too." Merrick rubbed the back of his neck. "But Harrigan keeps insisting some of us are not calling wind properly. He thinks if we tighten up our fundamentals, we can overcome the mechanical issues. Wind calls were not the problem today. The weapons themselves could not maintain consistent point of impact regardless of environmental factors. Try telling that to Harrigan." Merrick's expression was wry. "He is convinced this is solvable through better shooting. I think he just cannot accept that equipment might be the limiting factor instead of skill. Some operators struggle with that distinction," Brenna offered. "Well, tomorrow should be interesting either way." Merrick started to walk away, then turned back. For what it is worth, I noticed you spotting some of the mechanical issues before the engineers did. The scope can on Rifle 7, the bedding gaps on Rifle 12. You have a good eye. Thank you, sir. Merrick nodded and continued toward the barracks. Brenna remained standing in the pool of light, considering his observation. She had tried to remain unnoticed, just another support staff member doing her assigned job. But people who knew what to look for could still see the signs of deeper expertise. She resumed, walking toward her quarters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new failures, new frustrations. The Mark 7 evaluation was spiraling toward inevitable cancellation, taking careers and contracts with it. Somewhere in the chain of development, critical mistakes had been made. Now everyone involved would pay the price. Inside her small room, Brenna removed her boots and sat on the edge of the narrow bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear voices from adjacent rooms, evaluators discussing the day's disaster. Harrigan's voice was among them, still arguing that better fundamentals could salvage the situation. She lay back, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow the failures would continue, the frustration would mount, and eventually someone would make the decision she had already reached. The Mark 7 was not ready for service. Dawn came cold and clear, the desert sky shifting from black to deep purple to pale gold. Brenna was already at the range when the first light touched the target arrays. She had slept poorly, her mind churning through the technical problems she had observed. Now she moved through her morning equipment checks with automatic precision, hands working while her thoughts remained elsewhere. The evaluators arrived in groups, their conversations subdued compared to the previous morning's confidence. Harrigan appeared last, his face showing the effects of insufficient sleep. He moved directly to the equipment area and began inspecting his assigned rifle with methodical intensity, checking every component as if sheer attention might reveal a solution. Colonel Kern's morning briefing was brief. Today we focus on precision courses and known distance engagement protocols. The performance metrics remain the same. Complete documentation is required regardless of individual results. He paused, surveying the assembled personnel. I am aware of the challenges you faced yesterday. Today's exercises will provide additional data points for engineering analysis. The morning session began with cold bore shots at 700 meters. Each evaluator would fire a single round from a cold, clean barrel, simulating field conditions where a first shot hit might be the only opportunity. Brenna watched from her station as shooters took their positions. Harrigan fired first. The round impacted low and left, missing the target completely. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The Boston sergeant fired next, achieving a hit on the target frame, but outside all scoring rings. Down the line, the pattern repeated. Of 20 shooters, only 3 achieved hits within the scoring area, and none approached center mass. Captain Merrick approached the ammunition station, his expression carefully neutral. I need match grade, lot 9-4. Maybe the premium ammunition will help. Brenna retrieved the requested lot. She had noted this pattern yesterday. As frustration mounted, evaluators requested increasingly specialized ammunition, searching for any variable they could control. The result was always the same. The problem was not the ammunition. Merrick took the box and returned to his lane. Brenna watched him load, settle, and fire. The round struck the target frame's upper edge, technically a hit, but useless for actual engagement. He sat up slowly, removed his eye protection, and stared downrange with the expression of someone questioning their own competence. By mid-morning, the atmosphere had shifted from frustration to something darker. Shooters moved through their protocols with mechanical compliance, going through motions they knew would produce failure. The sound of rifles continued, but the energy had drained from the range. Even Harrigan's earlier intensity had faded into grim determination. During a target reset pause, several evaluators gathered near Brenna's station. The conversation drifted to her as they discussed the morning's results. The young specialist was speaking, his voice uncertain. Maybe we should try different shooting positions. If the rifles are that sensitive to input, prone might not be optimal. Harrigan responded, his tone sharper than necessary. The position is not the problem. The rifle is the problem. How many ways do I need to say this before it penetrates? I was just suggesting. I know what you were suggesting. Harrigan cut him off. We have tried different positions, different ammunition, different optics mounting, different everything. The common factor in every failure is the weapon itself. The specialist fell silent, face flushed. The Boston sergeant stepped in. Kid was just trying to help. No need to bite his head off. Harrigan turned away without responding, stalking back toward his lane. The group dispersed awkwardly, leaving the specialist standing alone. He glanced toward Brenna, seemed about to speak, then thought better of it and followed the others. Brenna had watched the exchange without expression, but internally she noted the deteriorating group dynamics. Stress was fracturing the professional courtesy that normally characterized military evaluations. Harrigan, in particular, was showing signs of acute frustration that were beginning to affect his judgment and leadership. The precision course began after lunch. This exercise required engaging multiple targets at varying distances within strict time limits. It was designed to test not just accuracy but speed, target transition, and the ability to maintain performance under pressure. With functional weapons, experienced shooters could complete the course with 90% hit rates. Today would be different. Harrigan took his run first. Brenna watched the timer count down as he engaged the first target at 600 meters. Mississippi. He transitioned to the second target at 700. Hit on frame, no score. Third target at 800 meters. Complete miss. His frustration was visible in his movements now, the smooth transitions becoming jerky and rushed. By the end of his run, he had achieved 3 scoring hits out of 15 attempts. He stood from his position, face dark with anger. The range officer approached with a scorecard, but Harrigan waved it away. I know the score. It is the same score everyone else will get because these rifles cannot shoot. Lieutenant, the range officer began, but Harrigan was already walking away from the line. He headed toward the equipment area, movements sharp with contained fury. Brenna could see him struggling with the cognitive dissonance of professional failure. Men like Harrigan built their identities on competence. Equipment failure felt like personal failure, regardless of logic. Other evaluators completed their runs with similar results. The precision course, designed to challenge elite shooters with functional equipment, became an exercise in documenting comprehensive failure with dysfunctional tools. The scorecards told a uniform story: single-digit hit percentages, missed time limits, and frustrated operators. Captain Merrick finished his run and approached Brenna's station, ostensibly to return ammunition, but clearly wanting to talk. "This is brutal," he said quietly. "I have been shooting competitively for 12 years. I know I'm not missing fundamentals. But watching these results, you start to question everything. The weapons are failing, not the shooters," Brenna replied. "I know that intellectually, but tell that to the part of my brain that evaluates performance." Merrick shook his head. Harrigan is taking it worst. He needs everything to be about skill. Equipment failure means he cannot fix it through training or effort. Some people struggle with factors beyond their control. That is exactly it. Merrick looked back toward the range where another shooter was beginning their run. "We are used to being the solution. Put us behind cover with a rifle and tell us to solve a problem, we solve it. But this? We cannot shoot our way out of bad engineering." The afternoon wore on with the predictable rhythm of documented failure. Shooters attempted their runs, recorded poor scores, and returned to their lanes with expressions ranging from frustration to resignation. The engineers continued their work, but their faces showed the same understanding that was settling over everyone. The Mark 7 evaluation was not salvageable. During a break, Brenna noticed Harrigan standing alone near the far edge of the range. He was staring at the distant target arrays, rifle held loosely in one hand. His posture suggested a man engaged in internal argument, wrestling with conclusions he did not want to reach. She recognized the moment. It was the point where denial broke against reality's weight. Colonel Kern appeared on the observation deck as the final shooter completed their precision run. His expression remained professionally neutral, but Brenna detected tension in his bearing. He descended to the range floor and called for the evaluators to gather. The gathered evaluators formed a loose semicircle around Colonel Kern. Their faces showed the accumulated strain of 2 days spent fighting unwinnable battles. Even normally unshakable professionals looked worn, their confidence eroded by equipment that refused to perform. Kern surveyed them before speaking. I have reviewed the preliminary data. The results are consistent with what you have experienced. The Mark 7 platform is demonstrating systemic failures across multiple metrics. However, we have additional protocols that must be completed before I can submit final recommendations. Harrigan stepped forward. Colonel, with respect, we have sufficient data. Continuing this evaluation serves no purpose except to waste more ammunition and time. The weapons fail basic accuracy standards. That is all headquarters needs to know. I understand your position, Lieutenant. However, contractual obligations require completion of the full test protocol. We have 3 exercises remaining: low-light engagements, rapid target acquisition, and stress fire scenarios. Engineering specifically requested data from these conditions. The Boston sergeant spoke up, his accent thickening with frustration. Sir, these rifles cannot hit stationary targets in perfect daylight. What do you think will happen in low light or under time pressure? That is precisely what we need to document, Kern replied. The data must show failure across all conditions, not just some. Otherwise, the contractor will argue we did not complete due diligence. So we're building a legal case, not evaluating weapons. Harrigan's voice carried an edge. We are wasting elite operators' time to satisfy lawyers. We are completing our assigned mission, Lieutenant. Kern's tone hardened slightly. You will continue the evaluation as ordered. Is that understood? The challenge hung in the air for a long moment. Harrigan's jaw worked, frustration and discipline warring visibly. Finally, he nodded. Understood, sir. The group dispersed, their movements carrying the weight of reluctant compliance. Brenna watched them return to their positions, saw the slumped shoulders and heavy steps. The evaluation had shifted from professional assessment to bureaucratic requirement, draining whatever remained of the initial purpose. The low-light protocols began as the sun dropped toward the horizon. Targets were repositioned at 600 meters, barely visible in the gathering dusk. Shooters would engage using night vision optics mounted to the already problematic rifles, adding another layer of complexity to an impossible task. Harrigan settled behind his rifle, the night vision monocular position before his shooting eye. The world through night vision was a landscape of green shadows and uncertain depth perception. He steadied his breathing, found his target in the grainy image, and fired. The muzzle flash whited out his night vision, leaving him blind for several seconds while his optics recovered. When his vision cleared, the target remained unmarked. He fired again. Mississippi. And again. Hit on frame, outside scoring. The pattern continued down the line as each shooter struggled with the compounded problems of failing weapons and compromised visibility. The sound of rifles was punctuated by muttered curses and the sharp clack of bolts working in frustration. The young specialist experienced a weapon malfunction during his run, the bolt locking shut on a round that failed to chamber properly. He attempted to clear it, working the charging handle with increasing force. The rifle refused to cooperate. Finally, he called a ceasefire and requested assistance from the range safety officer. Brenna watched the safety officer examine the weapon, saw the shake of his head that indicated a serious mechanical failure. The specialist was issued a replacement rifle from the backup pool, but the interruption had broken whatever remained of his composure. When he resumed shooting, his fundamentals had deteriorated, flinching before each shot in anticipation of another malfunction. As darkness fell completely, the range lights came on, harsh illumination that destroyed natural night vision but was necessary for safety. The low-light exercise concluded with results even worse than daylight shooting. Across 20 shooters and multiple strings of fire, the hit percentage dropped below 2%. Several rifles experienced malfunctions serious enough to require armor intervention. Harrigan approached the ammunition station, his night vision optics still mounted to his helmet. He looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from sustained stress rather than physical exertion. "I need Lot 773 for tomorrow's exercises," he said. "May as well have it staged and ready." Brenna retrieved the ammunition and set it aside for morning issue. She logged the request, noting that Harrigan was already planning for the next day's failures. His tone had changed from angry frustration to resigned acceptance, a shift that suggested he had finally internalized what everyone else already knew. "You've been doing this job long?" Harrigan asked unexpectedly. "Supply and logistics support?" "Several years," Brenna replied, keeping her answer neutral. "You ever see an evaluation this bad?" He gestured toward the range where the last shooters were clearing their weapons. "Complete systemic failure across the board? Every evaluation has challenges. This one has more than most. That is putting it diplomatically." Harrigan removed his helmet, running a hand through sweat-dampened hair. "I keep thinking there must be something we are missing. Some combination of factors that would make these rifles work. But we have tried everything. Different ammunition, different optics, different shooting positions, different environmental conditions. Nothing helps. Sometimes equipment simply fails to meet requirements," Brenna offered. I know that. But admitting it feels like giving up. Like we did not try hard enough." He paused, seemed to realize he was revealing too much to someone he barely knew. "Anyway, thanks for staging the ammunition." He walked away before she could respond. Brenna watched him go, noting the defeat in his posture. Harrigan had entered the evaluation as the confident alpha, the expert who could solve any shooting problem through skill and experience. 2 days had reduced him to this, a man questioning his competence because equipment beyond his control had failed. The evening debrief was subdued. Colonel Kern presented the data without commentary, letting the numbers speak for themselves. 2% hit rate in low-light conditions. 5 weapon malfunctions requiring armor intervention. 0 shooters achieving minimum qualifying scores. The slides advanced with mechanical inevitability, each one documenting another aspect of comprehensive failure. When Kern finished, no one asked questions. The evaluators filed out silently, heading toward the mess tent or their quarters. The energy that typically followed range days, the competitive banter and technical discussions, was completely absent. They moved like men who had experienced defeat, even though the defeat was not theirs. Brenna completed her end-of-day documentation and secured the ammunition supply. Tomorrow would bring the final exercises, rapid target acquisition and stress fire scenarios. The results were predictable. The rifles would continue failing, the shooters would continue struggling, and eventually Colonel Kern would submit his report recommending program cancellation. Walking back to her quarters, she passed the engineer's workspace again. Fewer personnel remained tonight, just 2 men examining disassembled bolt assemblies under bright task lighting. One engineer looked up as she passed, his expression carrying the same exhaustion she had seen on the shooters. Everyone involved in this evaluation was failing, each in their own way. In her room, Brenna sat on the edge of the bed and removed her boots. Through the walls, she heard quiet conversations, someone's radio playing low music, the ordinary sounds of personnel settling in for the night. But underneath ran a current of stress and frustration that 2 days of systematic failure had created. She thought about Harrigan's question. Had she seen an evaluation this bad? Yes, she had. She had seen programs fail for similar reasons. Poor engineering, inadequate testing, manufacturing problems that should have been caught earlier. But those evaluations had not carried this same emotional weight. The shooters had not taken the failures so personally. Tomorrow would be difficult. The final exercises would push already frustrated operators through scenarios designed to test their limits. With functional weapons, these exercises revealed individual capability. With the Mark 7, they would simply reveal new ways for the rifles to fail. And the shooters would internalize each failure as personal inadequacy, no matter how clearly the data showed otherwise. The third morning arrived with a sandstorm brewing on the horizon, dark clouds of dust rolling across the desert like an approaching army. The wind had picked up overnight, carrying grit that found every gap in clothing and equipment. Brenna tasted dust as she walked to the range, felt it grinding between her teeth. Colonel Kern postponed the morning session, waiting to see if the weather would clear. The evaluators gathered in the briefing room, restless with forced inactivity. Conversation was sparse, men checking phones or staring at the sandstorm through the windows. The room carried the atmosphere of a waiting room before bad news. Harrigan sat apart from the others, methodically cleaning his rifle despite having cleaned it the previous night. His hands moved through the familiar motions with automatic precision, removing the bolt, wiping down the chamber, running patches through the barrel. The work was unnecessary, but provided something to control in an evaluation where control had become illusion. The Boston sergeant approached Brenna, where she stood reviewing inventory sheets. "You think we will actually shoot today, or is this weather going to shut us down?" "The forecast shows clearing by noon," Brenna replied. "Colonel Kern will likely resume then." "Good. Let's get this over with." The sergeant glanced toward Harrigan. "He is taking this harder than anyone. You noticed?" "I have noticed. Guy has built his whole identity on being the best shooter in any room. These rifles are destroying that." The sergeant lowered his voice. "Between you and me, I think he's starting to crack. Saw him last night, taking practice shots with an unloaded rifle, working fundamentals like a basic trainee. He's trying to fix himself when the problem is not him." "Equipment failure affects people differently," Brenna said carefully. "Yeah, well, some of us can accept that tools break. Harrigan needs everything to be about skill, because skill is what he controls. Take that away, and he does not know who he is anymore." The sergeant moved on before Brenna could respond. She watched him join a group near the coffee station, their conversation a low murmur punctuated by occasional laughter. They had processed the evaluation's failure and moved to acceptance. Harrigan remained stuck in the anger stage, fighting a battle already lost. By 1100 hours, the sandstorm had passed, leaving behind scoured earth and equipment covered in fine dust. The range crew spent 30 minutes cleaning optics and checking weapons for contamination before Colonel Kern authorized resuming operations. The evaluators took their positions with the mechanical compliance of men fulfilling obligations rather than pursuing excellence. The rapid target acquisition exercise began. Shooters would engage 6 targets appearing at random intervals and distances between 400 and 900 meters. Each target remained visible for only 8 seconds before dropping. The exercise tested reaction time, target identification, and the ability to make accurate shots under time pressure. It was designed to simulate combat engagement conditions where hesitation meant failure. Harrigan took his position. The first target appeared at 600 meters. He acquired it quickly, fired, and missed. The target dropped. Second target at 700 meters. Mississippi third target at 400 meters, a closer shot that should have been simple. Hit on frame, outside scoring. By the 6th target, his jaw was clenched so tight Brenna could see the muscle jumping even from her station 30 meters away. He stood from the firing line, rifle in hand, and walked directly to the equipment area. Setting the weapon on the table with careful control, he turned and walked away from the range entirely. The range officer called after him, but Harrigan continued without acknowledgement, disappearing around the corner of the control building. Captain Merrick approached Colonel Kern, spoke quietly. Kern nodded and gestured for the exercise to continue. The remaining shooters completed their runs with predictable results. Single-digit hit percentages, missed targets, frustration evident in every movement. The exercise that should have showcased elite capability instead documented the comprehensive failure of men denied functional tools. During a reset pause, the young specialist approached Brenna Station. His confidence from the first day had evaporated, replaced by uncertainty that showed in his hesitant movements. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Do you think this evaluation reflects our actual capability? Like, if headquarters sees these scores, will they understand it was the rifles and not us? The data clearly shows systemic weapon failure across all shooters and all conditions. Any competent analysis will reach that conclusion. But what if they do not? What if someone looks at my scorecard and decides I am not qualified? The specialist's voice carried genuine anxiety. This is my first major evaluation. These scores could follow me for my entire career. Brenna considered her response. Colonel Kern's report will provide context. He will explain the circumstances and ensure the evaluation is properly characterized. I hope you are right. The specialist took his ammunition and returned to his lane, but his shoulders remained hunched with worry. Brenna watched him settle behind his rifle, saw the tension in his posture. He was no longer shooting to demonstrate skill, but shooting to avoid failure, which guaranteed the very outcome he feared. Harrigan returned 20 minutes later, his face carefully neutral. He spoke briefly with Colonel Kern, nodded at whatever the colonel said, and returned to his lane. When his next turn came, he approached the firing line with the deliberate movements of someone exercising extreme self-control. The targets appeared. Harrigan engaged each one with mechanical precision, no wasted movement, no visible emotion. Every shot missed or hit outside scoring, but his external composure never wavered. He had locked down whatever internal storm had driven him away earlier, replacing it with professional detachment. The transformation was complete, from confident expert to frustrated warrior to emotionally disconnected functionary. The afternoon brought the stress fire scenarios. Shooters would engage multiple targets while performing physically demanding tasks designed to elevate heart rate and degrade fine motor control. Running between positions, performing exercises, then immediately engaging targets at distance. It simulated combat conditions where perfect shooting position was luxury rather than reality. The exercise was brutal even with functional equipment. With the Mark 7 rifles, it became an exercise in compounded failure. Shooters gasping for breath, muscles shaking from exertion, trying to achieve precision with weapons that could not deliver accuracy under perfect conditions. The results were predictable and devastating. Brenna watched the young specialist complete his run, literally stumbling to the firing line after a 50-meter sprint with full gear. He dropped into position, tried to steady his breathing, and fired at the 600-meter target. Complete miss. He fired again, the rifle's recoil driving his fatigued body backward. Another miss. By his fifth shot, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate the bolt. He achieved 0 hits on 6 attempts. The specialist sat up, removed his eye protection, and Brenna saw tears tracking through the dust on his face. He wiped them away quickly, but not before several other shooters noticed. No one commented. They had all been pushed to similar breaking points over the past 3 days. There was no shame left, only shared misery. Colonel Kern called an early halt to the exercise after the 15th shooter experienced a rifle malfunction serious enough to require ceasing fire. The weapon's bolt had sheared a locking lug, rendering it completely inoperable. The armorer examined it and declared the rifle unsafe for further use. It was the 11th serious mechanical failure of the evaluation. Gather for final debrief in 30 minutes, Kern announced. Evaluators returned to the equipment area, movements slow with exhaustion. 3 days of sustained failure had drained them completely. They cleaned weapons with automatic motions, secured gear, prepared for whatever Kern would say in the final briefing. Brenna completed her end-of-day documentation, reconciling ammunition expenditure against the day's activities. The numbers told the story. Thousands of rounds fired, minimal hits achieved, comprehensive failure documented across every metric and every condition. The Mark 7 evaluation was complete, and the verdict was unambiguous. She secured the ammunition supply for the final time, locked the depot, and headed toward the briefing room. The evaluators were already assembling, taking seats with the weary resignation of soldiers after a losing battle. Harrigan sat in the back row, face carefully blank. The young specialist sat near the front, still not quite meeting anyone's eyes. Captain Merrick stood near the door, arms crossed, expression thoughtful. Colonel Kern entered precisely on time. He carried a tablet and a folder of documentation. Taking his position at the front of the room, He surveyed the assembled personnel before speaking. The silence was absolute. Colonel Kern set his tablet on the podium and surveyed the room with an expression that revealed nothing. "Gentlemen, we have completed the evaluation protocol for the Mark 7 precision rifle system. The data has been collected, documented, and will be submitted to program oversight within 48 hours. Before dismissal, I want to address several matters." He paused, and in that pause Brenna sensed something shifting. Kern's carefully neutral expression carried an undercurrent she had not detected before. "First, I want to acknowledge your professionalism throughout this evaluation. You were asked to complete a difficult assignment under frustrating conditions. Every one of you maintained discipline and continued performing your duties despite equipment that consistently failed to meet basic standards. That professionalism is noted and will be reflected in my report." Harrigan shifted in his seat, but said nothing. Around the room, evaluators sat motionless, waiting for whatever came next. "Second," Kern continued, "the preliminary engineering analysis has identified the root causes of the Mark 7's failures. Manufacturing variances in barrel production, inconsistent heat treatment of bolt assemblies, and quality control failures in scope mounting systems. These are not design flaws, but production and oversight failures. The contractor will face significant consequences." The Boston sergeant spoke up. "Sir, does that mean the program continues with corrected manufacturing?" "That decision is above my level," Kern replied. "However, given the scope of the failures and the time required to implement proper quality control, I would expect significant delays at minimum. More likely, the program will be restructured entirely or canceled." "So we spent 3 days documenting what should have been caught before any of us ever saw these rifles," Harrigan said. His voice carried no anger now, just flat statement of fact. "Correct, Lieutenant. That is precisely what happened. And that failure extends beyond the contractor to the oversight agencies that should have verified production quality before authorizing this evaluation. Multiple parties failed to perform their responsibilities." The room absorbed this in silence. Brenna watched the evaluators process the confirmation of what they had suspected. Their frustration had been justified. The failures were not theirs. "Third," Kern said, and his tone shifted slightly, "I want to address a specific issue that has come to my attention. During this evaluation, several of you made comments about the support staff, particularly regarding ammunition supply and logistics coordination." Brenna felt the tension shift toward her position near the back wall. She kept her expression neutral, wondering where Kern was heading. "I want to be very clear about something. The personnel assigned to support this evaluation are not simply logistics staff. They are selected based on expertise and experience relevant to weapons testing. Sergeant Castellano, would you please step forward?" The request caught her completely off guard. For a fraction of a second, Brenna considered refusing. Then discipline overrode instinct. She moved through the room, aware of every eye tracking her progress. Reaching the front, she stood at attention beside the podium. Kern turned to face the evaluators. "Gentlemen, allow me to properly introduce Sergeant Major Brenna Castellano. Service record includes 12 years as a designated marksman, 8 years as a primary instructor at the Advanced Marksmanship Unit, and current assignment as Senior Weapons Evaluator for Special Operations Command. Her file includes 17 operational deployments and certification on 43 different weapons platforms." The room had gone completely silent. Harrigan sat forward, his expression shifting from neutral to focused attention. Captain Merrick's eyebrows had risen almost to his hairline. The young specialist looked like someone had struck him. "Sergeant Major Castellano holds the current military record for confirmed precision engagement at 1,900 meters," Kern continued. "She has been decorated 3 times for actions under fire and holds expert qualifications that exceed every shooter in this room. She was assigned to this evaluation specifically because her expertise would allow her to identify technical problems that standard logistics personnel might miss." Brenna maintained her position at attention, face carefully blank. This was not how she preferred to operate. Anonymity was more comfortable than recognition. But Kern was making a point, and she understood why. During this evaluation, Kern said, Sergeant Major Castellano identified 11 distinct mechanical failures before our engineering staff discovered them. Her technical observations have been incorporated into my final report and will significantly strengthen our case for program termination. The knowledge you assumed was simple ammunition supply was actually expert-level weapons analysis conducted by one of the military's most qualified evaluators. Harrigan stood slowly. Sir, I owe the Sergeant Major an apology. Several of us made assumptions based on job assignment rather than actual qualification. You do, Lieutenant, and I suspect you are not alone in that. Kern's gaze swept the room. This brings me to my final point. Expertise does not always announce itself. Some of the most capable personnel operate quietly, without requiring recognition or validation. That does not make them less qualified than those who lead with their credentials. The message landed with visible impact. The young specialist looked stricken, clearly replaying every interaction he had had with Brenna over the past 3 days. The Boston sergeant had developed sudden interest in the floor. Several other evaluators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sergeant Major Castellano, Kern said, Do you have anything to add to this evaluation summary? Brenna considered carefully. Sir, the evaluators performed their duties professionally under difficult circumstances. The equipment failures they experienced were comprehensive and systemic. Their frustration was entirely justified. Noted. Kern turned back to the room. One final matter. Tomorrow morning, we have one additional test before dismissal. The contractor has requested a demonstration of the Mark 7 under ideal conditions with an expert shooter. They believe operator error may have contributed to the poor results. Anger flashed across multiple faces. Harrigan stood again. Sir, that is completely. I am aware of your position, Lieutenant. However, contractual obligations require we accommodate this request. Kern's expression hardened. The demonstration will consist of 100 rounds fired at multiple distances under optimal conditions. We will document the results and include them in the final report. Who is taking shots? Captain Merrick asked. Kern glanced at Brenna. Sergeant Major Castellano has volunteered to conduct the demonstration. If the rifles can perform, she will demonstrate that capability. If they cannot, we will have definitive proof from a shooter whose credentials exceed any possible challenge. The room erupted in conversation, evaluators turning to each other with expressions ranging from surprise to satisfaction. Harrigan remained standing, looking directly at Brenna. His expression had shifted to something like respect mixed with curiosity. Brenna maintained her position, already running calculations in her mind. 100 rounds, multiple distances, optimal conditions. The Mark 7 had shown consistent failures across all previous testing. Tomorrow would either prove the rifles could perform with perfect execution or provide unassailable evidence of their fundamental inadequacy. Either way, the evaluation would end with definitive results. Dismissed, Kern said. Final formation at 0700 tomorrow for the demonstration. The evaluators filed out, their conversations animated now with new energy. The reveal of Brenna's actual identity and qualifications had shifted the dynamic completely. What had been a deflating failure was now a story with an unexpected turn, and tomorrow promised a conclusion worth witnessing. Harrigan approached as Brenna prepared to leave. Sergeant Major, I owe you more than an apology. I was dismissive and unprofessional. You were frustrated with circumstances beyond your control, Brenna replied. The response was understandable. Maybe, but not excusable. He paused, choosing his words carefully. For what it is worth, I hope tomorrow's demonstration shows these rifles can actually shoot, would restore some faith in the whole process. We will see what the weapons can do under ideal conditions, Brenna said. That is all any evaluation can determine. Harrigan nodded and moved toward the door. Brenna watched him go, noting the change in his bearing. Learning her actual qualifications had reframed his entire experience of the evaluation. It had not been elite operators failing with expert weapons, but expert weapons failing elite operators, and the distinction mattered. The night brought restless energy to the compound. Brenna heard voices in the barracks long past normal lights out, evaluators discussing the next day's demonstration with the kind of anticipation that had been absent since the evaluation began. She lay in her narrow bed listening to the muffled conversations, already mentally preparing for what tomorrow would require. Sleep came eventually, but remained shallow. She woke at off of 100, a full hour before necessary, and found herself unable to return to sleep. Rising, she dressed and walked to the range in darkness, her path illuminated by scattered security lights and a thin crescent moon. The range was empty at this hour, the target arrays barely visible as geometric shapes against the lightening sky. Brenna walked the firing line slowly, examining the setup for tomorrow's demonstration. Someone had already staged equipment at Lane 10, the center position where visibility would be optimal. A single Mark 7 rifle rested in its case, ammunition boxes stacked beside it in precise rows. She opened the case and examined the weapon. It was a different rifle from those used in the main evaluation, pulled from reserve stock specifically for this demonstration. The contractor's representatives had insisted on selecting it themselves, ensuring no claim of sabotage or deliberate equipment choice could undermine the results. Brenna checked the serial number, noted it in her mental log, and began her inspection. The rifle showed the same manufacturing variances she had observed in the evaluation weapons. Barrel bedding with slight gaps, scope mounting that was not quite true, bolt operation that felt inconsistent. These were not catastrophic flaws, but accumulations of small imperfections that would degrade precision at distance. The contractor believed a skilled shooter could overcome them. Brenna knew better. Footsteps approached from behind. She turned to find Captain Merrick walking up the range, coffee cup in hand. Could not sleep either? He asked. Wanted to inspect the equipment before the demonstration. Smart. Merrick moved beside her, looking at the staged rifle. I did some research last night. Your service record is remarkable. That shot in Kandahar, the one that stopped the ambush on the convoy, that was you? That was a long time ago. 9 years. But still military legend. 1,900 meters, hostile sniper in a bell tower, conditions that should have made the shot impossible. 1 round, 1 kill, convoy saved. Merrick sipped his coffee. I heard the story at sniper school. They told it like myth. Did not realize the shooter was still active duty. The shot was possible because conditions aligned correctly. Equipment, environment, execution. Remove any one factor and it fails. Is that what you expect tomorrow? That the factors will not align? Brenna set the rifle back in its case. I expect the equipment to perform exactly as it has performed throughout this evaluation. Consistently and poorly. My presence behind the rifle does not change the weapon's mechanical limitations. But you're going to try anyway. Make them work if they can be made to work. That is the assignment. Demonstrate maximum capability with the available equipment. If the rifles can perform, I will show that. If they cannot, that evidence will be definitive. Merrick nodded slowly. The evaluators are treating this like vindication. Like you proving the rifles cannot shoot validates their performance over the past 3 days. Does it not? Yes, but that is not why you're doing it. You're not performing for their egos. You're closing the evaluation with complete data. Same reason you did everything else these past 3 days. Before Brenna could respond, more figures appeared on the range. The evaluators were arriving early, drawn by the same anticipation that had disrupted sleep. They gathered in small groups, their conversations low but energetic. Even Harrigan arrived 15 minutes ahead of formation, his bearing showing renewed purpose. Colonel Kern appeared precisely at 0700. He surveyed the assembled personnel, noted the early arrival, and allowed himself a slight smile. Gentlemen, thank you for your punctuality. Today's demonstration will proceed as follows. Sergeant Major Castellano will fire 100 rounds at targets ranging from 400 to 1,200 meters. She will engage each distance with 20 rounds, allowing us to evaluate consistency across the weapon's intended operational range. Contractor representatives will observe and verify all procedures. 3 civilians emerged from the range control building. They wore business casual clothing that looked out of place on a military range, carried tablets and documentation folders, and had the carefully neutral expressions of people expecting confrontation. The lead representative, a thin man with silver-rimmed glasses, approached Colonel Kern. "Colonel, we want to ensure this demonstration follows proper protocols. The weapon has been randomly selected from reserve stock. The ammunition is standard military issue. The shooter, while highly qualified, should not be permitted to make modifications or adjustments beyond normal operational parameters. Sergeant Major Castellano will use the weapon exactly as issued," Kern replied. "No modifications, no special accommodations. That is the purpose of this demonstration." "Very good." The representative retreated to join his colleagues, all 3 taking positions where they could observe clearly. Brenna approached the firing line. The assembled evaluators had spread out along the observation area, finding positions with clear sight lines to both her and the target monitors. The atmosphere carried the energy of spectators at a sporting event, anticipation mixed with hope for a specific outcome. She picked up the Mark 7, feeling its weight and balance. The rifle was uncomfortable in subtle ways, stock length slightly wrong for her build, grip angle not quite optimal, weight distribution favoring the front end. These were correctable issues with proper fitting, but today she would use the weapon as issued. That was the point. 400 meters first, Kern announced. Target is the standard precision array. 20 rounds on command. Brenna settled into position, feeling the familiar routine of proper shooting form. Left elbow under the rifle, right elbow high and out, stock pocket in the shoulder, cheek weld consistent and firm. She found the target through the scope, a crisp circle against the desert backdrop. Her breathing steadied, slowing to the rhythm she had learned over thousands of repetitions. Commence firing. She pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked, the report sharp in the morning air. Through the scope, she saw the target, the impact point visible as a fresh hole, low and right from center, but within the scoring ring. She worked the bolt, chambered another round, found her natural respiratory pause, and fired again. The second round struck closer to center. The pattern continued. Each shot followed the last with mechanical precision, her body moving through the cycle without conscious thought. Load, breathe, aim, press, follow through. 20 rounds in 90 seconds, each placed with deliberate care. When she cleared the weapon and sat up, the target monitor showed her results. 18 hits in the scoring area, 2 on the frame outside scoring. Not perfect, but dramatically better than anything achieved during the evaluation. The assembled personnel had gone silent. Even the contractor representatives leaned forward, studying the target display with new attention. 600 meters, Colonel Kern announced. 20 rounds on command. Brenner reloaded and settled back into position. 600 meters increased the challenge significantly, adding time of flight, wind effect, and the rifle's mechanical inconsistencies. She noted the wind flags hanging limp, minimal environmental interference. Conditions were indeed optimal. She fired. The 600-meter target was smaller in her scope, requiring more precise hold and timing. The first round struck center mass, a clean hit that drew murmurs from the watching evaluators. She worked the bolt, settled, fired again. Another center hit. The rifle's inconsistencies were still present. She could feel them in the trigger pull and bolt operation, but she was compensating automatically, adjusting for each micro-variance without conscious calculation. 20 rounds downrange in 2 minutes. When she sat up and the target display updated, the results showed 17 hits in scoring area, 15 of them clustered near center. The contractor representatives were conferring in low voices, checking their tablets against the target data. Harrigan stood near the front of the observation area, arms crossed, watching with an expression Brenna could not quite read. Beside him, the Boston sergeant shook his head slowly, whether in disbelief or admiration was unclear. The young specialist had moved closer to the monitors, studying each impact point with intense focus. 800 meters, Colonel Kern called. 20 rounds on command. Brenna reloaded, working through her pre-shot routine. At this distance, the rifle's mechanical problems would matter more. The scope cant she had noted would create increasing deviation. The barrel harmonics would affect consistency. These were the distances where the Mark VII had failed most completely during the evaluation. She settled into position, found the target, and began her breathing cycle. The first shot felt wrong the moment she pressed the trigger. The rifle's recoil was sharper than expected, the bolt harder to cycle. She worked through it, chambered the next round, and fired again. This shot felt better, more controlled. Through the scope, she saw both impacts on target. The first low and left, the second nearly centered. She continued methodically. Some shots felt clean, the rifle cooperating. Others fought her, the mechanical inconsistencies creating resistance she had to overcome. But she had fired thousands of rounds through problematic weapons during her career. Her body knew how to adapt, making microscopic adjustments to compensate for equipment deficiencies. 20 rounds complete. The target display showed 14 hits in scoring area, 6 on frame. Still better than anything from the evaluation, but the degradation at distance was becoming evident. The rifle was reaching its limitation, and no amount of skill could fully compensate. The contractor representatives looked less confident now. Their earlier defensive posture had shifted to concern. The lead representative approached Colonel Kern. "Colonel, we would like to examine the rifle before continuing. Verify it matches the specifications we documented." Kern nodded. "Sergeant Major, make the weapon safe and present for inspection." Brenna cleared the rifle and handed it to the representative. He examined the serial number, checked it against his documentation, then inspected the scope mounting and barrel bedding. His expression tightened as he found the same variances Brenna had noted that morning. After a long moment, he returned the rifle without comment and rejoined his colleagues. Their conversation was animated but too quiet to overhear. 900 meters, Kern announced. 20 rounds on command. This was the distance where evaluators had struggled most. 900 meters pushed precision rifles to their effective limits even under ideal conditions. With the Mark VII's problems, it would require everything Brenna had learned in 12 years of advanced marksmanship. She settled behind the rifle, feeling the weight of attention from every person on the range. The target was a small circle in her scope now, wavering slightly in the heat shimmer despite the morning cool. She controlled her breathing, found the stillness between heartbeats, and pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the recoil drove her shoulder, and she was already working the bolt before the impact registered. Hit center mass. She fired again and again. Each shot was its own challenge, requiring complete focus and precise execution. The rifle fought her on every round, the mechanical inconsistencies creating unpredictable resistance. But she had shot in Afghanistan under mortar fire, in training exercises with malfunctioning equipment, in competitions where one miss meant failure. This was just another challenge to overcome through discipline and skill. At round 15, the bolt stuck. She worked it with controlled force, feeling the resistance that indicated a cycling problem. The bolt cleared, but the interruption had broken her rhythm. She forced herself to restart her breathing cycle, re-establish her natural point of aim, and continue. 5 more rounds downrange, each one requiring renewed focus. When she cleared the weapon and sat up, sweat had soaked through her shirt despite the moderate temperature. The target display showed 11 hits in scoring area, 7 on frame, 2 complete misses. The degradation was clear, but the results still exceeded anything from the evaluation. Watching evaluators exchange glances, their expressions mixing vindication with something like awe. The contractor representatives were in heated discussion now, their earlier confidence completely gone. The lead representative kept checking his tablet, comparing numbers against the target data as if searching for some explanation that would restore their position. He found none. 1,000 meters, Colonel Kern called. 20 rounds on command. Brenna took a moment before reloading. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's harsh recoil. Her hands showed the beginning of strain from fighting the bolt's inconsistent operation. At 1,000 meters, The Mark 7's problems would be magnified beyond any reasonable compensation. This would show the weapon's true limitations under even the most skilled operation. She settled into position for the final time. The 1,000-meter target was barely visible in her scope, a small circle that seemed impossibly distant. She knew the calculations automatically: bullet drop, wind drift, time of flight. But calculations meant nothing if the rifle could not deliver consistent performance. This would be pure execution against mechanical inadequacy. The first shot surprised her. Clean trigger break, smooth recoil, and through the scope she saw the impact strike dead center. The rifle had cooperated for one perfect moment. She worked the bolt, hoping the cooperation would continue. It did not. The second shot fought her, the trigger creeping before breaking, the bolt cycling with grinding resistance. The impact struck low on the frame. She continued through all 20 rounds, experiencing the full range of the Mark 7's inconsistency. Some shots felt perfect and struck true. Others fought every input and scattered wide. The rifle was a gamble on every trigger press, sometimes delivering precision and sometimes failing completely. By round 20, her shoulder was bruised and her hands were cramping. She cleared the weapon and stood slowly. Every evaluator on the range was silent, waiting for the target display to update. When it did, the numbers told the complete story: 7 hits in scoring area, 9 on frame for complete misses. At 1,000 meters, even expert execution could not overcome systemic mechanical failure. Colonel Kern approached the contractor representatives. "Gentlemen, you have witnessed 100 rounds fired by one of the military's most qualified marksmen under optimal conditions. The results speak for themselves." The lead representative's face had gone pale. "Colonel, we will need to conduct our own analysis. You are welcome to analyze the data. However, the demonstration is complete and the results are documented." Kern's tone allowed no argument. "This evaluation is now concluded." The contractor representatives departed within the hour, their expressions grim and their documentation folders clutched tight. They had arrived expecting to prove operator error. They left with undeniable evidence of manufacturing failure demonstrated by a shooter whose credentials exceeded any possible challenge. Their legal position had collapsed in 100 rounds. The evaluators remained on the range after the contractors left, gathered in loose groups, discussing what they had witnessed. The atmosphere had transformed completely from the defeated resignation of the previous evening. Vindication carried its own energy, and conversations were animated with the release of 3 days' accumulated frustration. Harrigan approached Brenna as she was securing the demonstration rifle. "Sergeant Major, that was the most impressive shooting I have witnessed in 15 years of service. The fact that you achieved those results with equipment that fought you on every shot makes it more remarkable." "The rifle performed exactly as expected," Brenna replied. "The results simply documented that expectation under controlled conditions. You're too modest." Harrigan gestured toward the target displays, still showing her impact data. "At 1,000 meters with a rifle that could barely group at 600, you still put 7 rounds in scoring. Most shooters could not do that with perfect equipment. Most shooters have not spent 12 years learning to compensate for equipment deficiencies. Maybe, but compensation only goes so far. What you demonstrated this morning was mastery. Pure technical skill applied against mechanical limitation." He paused, choosing his words with visible care. "I owe you more than the apology I gave last night. I spent 3 days questioning my competence because I could not make these rifles perform. Watching you fight the same problems and overcome them through sheer expertise, it puts everything in perspective. You did not fail, Lieutenant. The equipment failed. The demonstration simply provided definitive proof of that fact. I know. Intellectually, I know that. But knowing and feeling are different things." Harrigan looked back toward the range where other evaluators were still gathered. "Every one of us built our careers on being the best shooters in our units. Coming here and performing like beginners, even with broken equipment, it damages something fundamental. What you did this morning restored that. Not because you made the rifles work, but because you showed exactly how bad they are even in expert hands. Captain Merritt joined them, the young specialist trailing behind him. Sergeant Major, I have a question if you have a moment. Go ahead. During the demonstration, I noticed you were adjusting your hold and position between shots at the longer distances. Not standard corrections, but something more subtle. Were you compensating for the barrel harmonics problem? Partially. The barrel vibration pattern was inconsistent, which meant each shot required individual adjustment rather than consistent hold. I was also compensating for scope cant and trigger creep variations. The young specialist spoke up, his voice tentative. Ma'am, could you teach that? The adjustment technique? Brenna considered the question. The adjustments I was making came from thousands of hours behind problematic weapons. It is not a technique you can teach in a classroom. It is pattern recognition developed through extensive experience with equipment failure. But it can be learned over time. The specialist pressed. Everything can be learned with sufficient practice and attention. But the better approach is to ensure your equipment does not require such compensation in the first place. The specialist nodded, though his expression suggested he was still processing the morning's demonstration. He had watched an expert struggle with the same rifles that had defeated him, and while the expert had achieved better results, the struggle itself had been visible. There was comfort in that, Brenner realized. The shared difficulty validated his own experience. Colonel Kern appeared at the edge of the group. Sergeant Major, a moment please. Brenna excused herself and joined Kern away from the others. He waited until they had privacy before speaking. That demonstration accomplished exactly what I needed. The contractors have no ground to stand on now. Their argument that operator error contributed to the failures is completely undermined by your performance. That was the intent, sir. Indeed. However, it also revealed something I had not fully appreciated. Kern paused, his expression thoughtful. Watching you work, seeing how you identified and compensated for each mechanical variance, it became clear that your expertise exceeds standard evaluation protocols. You were not just shooting. You were conducting real-time failure analysis while executing at a level few shooters could match. The assignment was to demonstrate maximum performance with available equipment. The analysis was necessary to achieve that performance, which is why I am recommending you for a position on the Weapons Development Board. We need evaluators who can identify problems before they reach field testing, not after. Your technical knowledge, combined with practical expertise, will be invaluable in that role. Brenna absorbed this carefully. Sir, I appreciate the recommendation, but my preference is for field assignments rather than administrative positions. Understood. However, consider it. The board position would allow you to prevent situations like this evaluation from occurring, stopping flawed weapons before they waste operator time and taxpayer money. Kern's expression was serious. You have the ability to make systemic improvements rather than just documenting failures. That is rare. I will consider it, sir. Good. Dismissed, Sergeant Major. And well done today. Brenner returned to the equipment area where evaluators were beginning to pack their gear for departure. The evaluation was officially complete, and personnel would be returning to their home units by evening. She began securing the demonstration rifle and ammunition, logging final counts, and completing documentation. The Boston sergeant approached, carrying his own equipment bag. Just wanted to say thanks before I head out. You saved all our reputations today. When the after-action reports go up the chain, nobody can claim we were incompetent. Not after watching you struggle with the same garbage rifles. The data was always going to show equipment failure regardless of who shot, Brenna said. My demonstration just made it more visible. Maybe, but visible matters, especially when careers are on the line. He shifted his bag to his other shoulder. For what it is worth, I learned more watching you shoot this morning than I did in my last 3 training courses. The way you adapted to each shot, how you stayed focused despite the rifle fighting you. That is masterclass instruction right there. He headed toward the transport vehicles before Brenna could respond. Others followed over the next hour, each stopping briefly to offer thanks or acknowledgement. Even those who said nothing showed respect in their bearing. The small adjustments in posture and eye contact that indicated shifted perspective. By afternoon, The range was nearly empty. Support staff had packed evaluation equipment. Engineers had crated the failed rifles for transport back to testing facilities. The target arrays stood unmarked now, reset to factory condition with no evidence remaining of 3 days' worth of systematic failure. Brenna completed her final documentation and submitted it to range control. The evaluation was officially closed, all data collected and logged. She gathered her personal gear and headed toward the transport area where a vehicle waited to take her to the airfield. Harrigan was standing near the transport, apparently waiting. When he saw her approaching, he straightened. "Sergeant Major, I wanted to catch you before you left. I've been thinking about what you said about equipment not requiring compensation. You were right, obviously, but in combat, equipment fails. Environmental conditions degrade performance. Nothing is ever ideal. So the ability to compensate, to adapt, and still execute, that is critical." "It is," Brenna agreed, "which is why I wanted to ask if you would consider running a training session for my unit. Advanced marksmanship under adverse conditions, teaching us to identify and compensate for equipment problems the way you demonstrated today. Send a request through proper channels. If my command approves it, I would be willing to provide instruction." "I will do that. Thank you." Harrigan extended his hand. "It has been an honor watching you work, Sergeant Major." She shook his hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. 3 days ago, Harrigan had been the confident alpha, dismissive of support staff and certain of his own expertise. The evaluation had broken that certainty, and her demonstration had rebuilt it on more solid foundation. He understood now that expertise came in many forms, and assumptions based on job titles or visible credentials were inadequate measures of capability. The transport carried Brenna across the desert toward the airfield, dust trails marking their passage through the empty landscape. She watched the evaluation facility shrink in the side mirror until it disappeared completely, just another collection of buildings swallowed by the vastness of high desert terrain. Her shoulders still ached from the morning's demonstration, a deep bruise forming where the Mark 7's harsh recoil had hammered the stock pocket repeatedly. Her hands showed strain from fighting the bolt's inconsistent operation. These were familiar pains, the kind that came from pushing equipment and body to their limits. They would fade within days, leaving no permanent mark. The evaluation itself would leave more lasting impact. Colonel Kern's report would travel up the chain of command, carrying comprehensive documentation of the Mark 7's failures. The contractor would face consequences ranging from financial penalties to criminal investigation, depending on what oversight agencies discovered. Careers would end. Contracts would be canceled. Millions of dollars in development investment would be written off as loss. But the evaluators would return to their units with reputations intact. The data proved what they had known from the first day. They had not failed. The equipment had failed them. That distinction mattered in military culture, where individual capability was measured and recorded, where a poor evaluation could shadow a career for years. Brenna had provided them that distinction through 100 rounds and 4 hours of shooting that had demonstrated both her expertise and the rifle's fundamental inadequacy. She had not done it for their egos or their reputations. She had done it because complete data served truth, and truth served everyone better than assumption or excuse. The airfield appeared ahead, a strip of tarmac and a handful of buildings shimming in afternoon heat. The transport pulled up to the terminal where a handful of personnel waited for their flights. Brenna gathered her gear and headed inside, already thinking about the return to her home unit and the work waiting there. Captain Merrick was inside the terminal, seated near the window with a tablet open on his lap. He looked up as she entered, closed the tablet, and stood. "Sergeant Major, I was hoping to catch you before your flight. I wanted to say something that did not seem appropriate with the others around." "Go ahead. What you did these past 3 days, it was not just about shooting or technical expertise. You showed us something about quiet professionalism that I think we all needed to see. The military tends to reward the loud, the visible, the people who announce their capabilities. You demonstrated that the most capable operators sometimes work in the background, doing their jobs without requiring recognition. Recognition is irrelevant to mission completion. Maybe, but it matters to the people watching. The young specialist, for example, he was crushed by his performance during the evaluation, thought he was not good enough, that maybe he did not belong with elite units. Watching you struggle with the same equipment, but push through with pure technical skill, it taught him something important about adapting to circumstances. Equipment failure is part of operational reality. Learning to work through it is essential training. Exactly. And you provided that training without intending to. That is the mark of true expertise. Teaching through example rather than instruction. Merrick paused, choosing his next words carefully. I spent 12 years building a reputation as a precision shooter. This evaluation threatened that reputation in ways I did not fully appreciate until it was happening. Your demonstration saved more than our scores. It saved our confidence in our own capabilities. The equipment failed, not the shooters. That was always the truth. The demonstration simply made it undeniable. True, but undeniable matters when doubt has taken root. We needed to see someone we respected struggle with the same problems and overcome them through sheer competence. You gave us that, so thank you. He extended his hand, and Brenna shook it, recognizing the gratitude as genuine. Merrick returned to his seat, reopening his tablet, and Brenna moved to the counter to check in for her flight. The clerk processed her paperwork with efficient disinterest, handed over boarding documentation, and directed her to the waiting area. She found a seat away from the others and settled in to wait. Through the window, she could see aircraft on the tarmac, cargo planes and transports preparing for various destinations. The military moved personnel constantly, flowing people and equipment across the globe in an endless circulation of readiness and response. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message. Colonel Kern had sent preliminary findings from the engineering team. They had sectioned 3 Mark 7 rifles and found manufacturing variances in 17 different components. Quality control had failed at multiple points in production, allowing defective parts to reach assembly. The problems were systemic, exactly as Brenna had assessed from observation alone. The message included a note. Your technical analysis was accurate on all counts. Recommend you seriously consider the Weapons Development Board position. We need this level of expertise in oversight roles. Brenna read the message twice, then set her phone aside. The board position would mean less field work, more time in offices and conference rooms. It would mean preventing problems rather than documenting them, stopping flawed weapons before they reached evaluations like this one. Kern was right that such work would have systemic impact beyond individual demonstrations of skill. But field work remained her preference. The direct application of expertise, the immediate feedback of performance under real conditions. Administrative positions served important functions, but they were not where she felt most effective. She would consider Kern's recommendation because discipline required consideration of legitimate orders. But her inclination remained toward operational assignments. The boarding call came over the terminal speakers. Brenna gathered her gear and joined the line of personnel moving toward the aircraft. Ahead of her, she recognized the young specialist, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He glanced back, saw her, and offered a small nod of acknowledgement. The gesture carried more respect than any salute. The flight lifted off 30 minutes later, climbing away from the desert facility until it became invisible below. Brenna watched through the small window as the landscape transformed from detailed terrain to abstract patterns of color and shadow. From this altitude, the evaluation facility was indistinguishable from surrounding desert, just another temporary human presence in ancient landscape. She thought about the 3 days just concluded. 20 evaluators had arrived expecting to test cutting-edge weapons and demonstrate their expertise. Instead, they had experienced systematic failure that challenged their understanding of their own capabilities. The evaluation had become a lesson in humility, in the limits of skill when equipment failed, in the importance of distinguishing between personal inadequacy and systemic problems. Her demonstration had provided clarity. showing that even expert execution could not overcome fundamental mechanical failure. But it had also shown what expertise looked like when applied with complete focus and discipline. Not flashy or dramatic, just methodical competence applied consistently across 100 rounds and 4 distances. If you enjoyed the story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, or if you have witnessed someone demonstrate unexpected expertise like this before. The aircraft leveled at cruising altitude. Around her, personnel settled into the flight's routine, some sleeping, others reading or working on laptops, a few engaged in quiet conversation. Brenna closed her eyes and let the engine noise fade into background static. She would return to her unit tomorrow, resume her regular duties, and begin planning for the next assignment. The Mark 7 evaluation would become one entry among many in her service record, notable perhaps, but not defining. Her career had been built on accumulation of such entries, each one adding to the foundation of demonstrated competence. Somewhere, the contractor's executives were receiving Colonel Kern's preliminary report and beginning to understand the scope of their failure. Quality control managers were being called to emergency meetings. Engineers were reviewing production processes, looking for where the system had broken down. The machinery of accountability was grinding into motion, and it would continue grinding long after this flight landed. But for Brenna, the evaluation was complete. She had been assigned a mission, executed it with precision, and documented the results. The rifle that had failed 20 elite shooters had also failed her, but her failure had come with perfect documentation of why. That documentation would serve the larger purpose of preventing future failures, protecting future operators from wasting time on inadequate equipment. The flight attendant passed through the cabin offering water and snacks. Brenna accepted water, but declined food, her appetite still suppressed by the morning's physical exertion. Her shoulder ached with each movement, a reminder that even routine demonstrations carried cost. She shifted position, finding an angle that minimized the discomfort, and returned to watching the landscape pass below. By the time they landed, the sun was setting, painting the sky in layers of orange and purple. Brenna gathered her gear and deplaned with the others, joining the flow of personnel moving through the terminal toward ground transportation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new assignments, new opportunities to apply expertise in service of larger missions. The Mark 7 evaluation was over. The rifles had failed. The evaluators had been vindicated. And somewhere in the accumulated data and documentation was truth that would serve everyone better than assumptions or excuses ever could. That was enough.